Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nathan Dean, and again, welcome to the Washington Policy Pulse. We're going to talk about all things politics and policy. This week, we're going to talk a little bit of the DNC conventions now that they are over. Dwayne Wright, as I just mentioned before the call, Dwayne Wright, our senior policy healthcare analyst, is going to talk about drug pricing. We're going to talk a little bit about the CFPB and a court case that's going to go on. I'm going to actually speak on behalf of Elliot Stein. He is our litigation analyst who's covering the CFPB. This is specifically the credit card late fee case that some of you may be following. I'll talk a little bit just about September shutdown talk, just because there's some rumors going around, and then we'll just give a small preview of the debate on September 10th and talk about some of the issues that are going on with that. So let's talk about the DNC convention. Well, the one thing that I would say is that we have this note out on the terminal, and if you're on my distribution email, you saw a little bit of this in that email, is that this isn't so much, there weren't many policies mentioned at the convention. It was kind of hard to actually for us to cover it because there weren't a lot of specifics. And, Bloomberg News put out an article about how Kamala Harris isn't really running a policy campaign. And look, there's several reasons for that. She is, late to the game in terms of, a presidential campaign. This campaign cycle is also not really much about policy. The differences between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are pretty stark. And so I think getting into the weeds, if you will, may not be beneficial for the campaigns at this point. We'll see going forward. But ultimately, I think they're just trying to try and capture this grandiose vision idea of America, and just again contrast it with what President Trump has been offering. The DNC did release its 92-page agenda at the convention. If you read it, you may have noticed that there were 15 instances of there talking about President Biden's second term. They didn't update this. The messaging that we got from the DNC through the reporting at Bloomberg News is that the DNC committee, actually approved this back in July. They didn't want to go back and actually go through that process. So the DNC agenda is, if you will, but we're actually not looking at it all that much, because what we are instead doing is going through the DNC and Kamala Harris's speeches and so forth, and just thinking about themes and how those themes ultimately play out. And right now we have four themes. First one is housing. This is the first presidential cycle, I want to say, in about 20, 24 years that actually has housing as one of its primary themes, if you will. But housing policy, as you can imagine, is very complex, and actually all that much, it's more at the state and local level than it is at the federal level. I mean, you see a lot more of those zonings at, communities and so forth. Look, if you own a house, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But housing policy can also be somewhat difficult because you have essentially two sides of the coin. You have homeowners who want to keep their mortgage values high, and then you have people who want to purchase home, and obviously they don't want houses to be unaffordable. So over the next week or so, the colleagues here at Bloomberg Intelligence, we actually, Eric Adelberg, our MBS strategist, put out a small note last week talking about it. My colleague Ben Elliott is going to have another note talking about it. So this time next week, if you have any further questions about housing and mortgage lending and so forth like that, please reach out, and we're going to have a lot more for you on the terminal. Price gouging. We talked a little about this before in one of our previous calls. Price gouging, it's one of those things where she has said that she wants to go after bad actors. We don't really foresee any type of legislation being proposed, or if there is proposed, you're not going to see anything in terms of caps putting prices on goods or anything. That's just not going to pass Congress. So again, it's an enforcement risk, not so much a policy risk. And essentially, you're talking about, is a company today a bad actor and already breaking existing regulations? That's kind of hard for a market perspective to cover. So price gouging, we don't think there's much of a market impact there. I've talked in the past about consumer issues, about how we think Kamala Harris is going to be a little bit progressive on consumer issues, maybe a little bit more moderate in areas that the Supreme Court may eventually play in. I'll talk about this in the credit card late fee blurb when Elliot gave me, and then finally tax. You've heard me talk about tax. So right now for Kamala Harris, we have those four themes, and as we go out over the next few weeks, we're going to see hopefully a little bit more and more. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne. Dwayne, did you have any other thoughts that you had from watching the DNC other than why didn't Beyonce show up like we all thought she did? I mean, at least I wanted Beyonce to show up. But anyway, any other thoughts you had from the convention, plus some of the drug pricing stuff you put out?
So that was the most disappointing part of the convention. So, so on healthcare, a lot of the focus was on reproductive rights, but beneath that, there's a lot of conversation about how a Harris administration will move to protect the Affordable Care Act, or at least a lot of the gains, enrollment gains through the Affordable Care Act. So one policy in particular that's going to be very important, because I think we've moved away from the threat of repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act. I just don't think votes are there. We're up to 21 million people. Republicans seem to have moved off. So what's the near-term threat? It's those enhanced ACA subsidies that were part of the COVID package in 2020, and then extended as part of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2023. Those expire in 2025, or at the end of 2025. The Harris administration wants to make them permanent. That would cost about $350 billion over 10 years, so it's not cheap. That would happen if Democrats can sweep, win the White House, win the House, and win the Senate. If it's a split, I think we get another 2-year extension. So that helps companies like Centene and United Health, where they have a lot of ACA enrollment. On drug pricing, there was a lot of talk about expanding the Inflation Reduction Act, especially as it relates to the number of drugs that would be subject to drug price controls. Right now, we're looking at 50 by the end of or up to 2029. The Harris administration and their platform talk about 50 per year. They need Democrats, or at least Congress, to weigh in and support that. That's not going to happen even in a democratically controlled Congress, because Democrats have pharma constituencies, and they're not likely to support it. So what we're left with is really an administration that's going to tout what happened this past week, where the drug prices came out, and we saw some pretty steep discounts off of the list price, not necessarily the net price, and looking ahead to, one, implementing those prices, and two, the next set of drugs that will be selected for drug price negotiation. And we're talking about some pretty big drugs: Ozempic, Wegovy, in particular, number one on the list, Xtandi for prostate cancer, and about 13 others. I think the big question is going to be, well, what will if President Trump wins, what will he do? My thinking is that he's not going to repeal it, even though he has supported negotiation as a candidate in 2016. He opposed it while he was president, and he still opposes it. But he has his own view of drug pricing. In fact, wanted to tie drug prices to those paid overseas. So I don't think he'll repeal it. He'll probably, to the extent that is talked about at all during this campaign, talk about how he can negotiate a better deal. So I think overall, ACA as a whole is fine. There are pieces of it that might be at risk. The IRA drug pricing provisions are, as a whole, probably safe, but you could see some modest tweaks within the law. So I think it'll be interesting to see what, if any, comments are made over the next 70 days about either the ACA or drug pricing.
Great, thanks, Dwayne. And for the folks, just please remember, you have the ability to ask questions for us in the chat or the Q&A function in the Zoom. And back on the Beyonce thing, I just wanted to point out, Politico is reporting this morning that it was actually a rumor started by a couple of DNC convention staffers, and once the momentum started going viral, they just said, hey, let's just run with it. So, hey. So we'll just move a little bit more on to the CFPB and what Elliot. Now, unfortunately, Elliot's not here today. He's actually at the U.S. Open. These are the 2 weeks a year that I live. I'm so envious of those of you who live in New York City, because you can get out to Queens and see some tennis. But Elliot is covering the credit card late fee rule for the CFPB. Now, the reason why this is so important is because you often hear people in the financial regulatory circles talk about Fifth Circuit and how rules are essentially going to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit is overturning these rules, or at least that's the idea. So, this year, the Supreme Court did away with the Majors Questions Doctrine and also what is known as the Chevron deference. And as a result, the Fifth Circuit in particular, this is based down in New Orleans, has been a little bit more interested in terms of looking at regulation, is a little bit more open in terms of overturning certain regulations. And so a lot of firms are essentially, the joke is out there, if you are going to sue the regulators, you need to have an office either in Dallas or New Orleans. So this credit card late fee rule has come out. They have actually sued on it, and they're fighting over jurisdiction. Now, the CFPB is looking to move the case from Texas to Washington, D.C. This is actually the third such bid by the CFPB to transfer that case, and they previously had gotten a favorable answer by the trial judge, only then to be reversed by this Fifth Circuit. So the issue that's coming up tomorrow is whether the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the plaintiffs in the case, has enough at stake in the litigation to qualify for what is called association standing, which allows like a trade group to sue on behalf of the lawsuits of their members. Now, the trial court judge, his name's Judge Pittman, previously found that the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce qualified for this as standing, but we don't think there's any reason for the judge to revisit that decision. But Judge Pittman, and according to Elliott, has been pretty unpredictable in this case so far, so let's certainly stay tuned to that. But even if he does, we anticipate the Fifth Circuit would overrule that and keep that case in Texas. Now, the rule is currently on hold while the litigation plays out, and the CFPB is trying to get that lifted, but Elliott's biggest case here, and this is what he's telling his clients, is that he thinks that on the merits, the rule will eventually be struck down. And so financial regulation over the next few years is going to be a lot like this, where if you are going to have something in the Fifth Circuit, things may actually be a little bit more dicey for some of those regulatory proposals. So if you have any questions on that, please feel free to reach out to Elliot. The last two things I want to do with you right now is I want to share my screen, and I want to give you just an update of where we are in the election monitor of where the race is at the moment. So if you can see my screen, you may be seeing the election monitor. And you can see here the race is certainly tightened up. Now, what I want to show you is this chart in particular, which is down the polling data for the state level results. And let me see, I think that didn't do it. So let me go ahead and stop the share and then open up the new map share. So what this is showing is a couple weeks ago I showed you this map, but this map didn't include a lot of that map at the time included a lot of the Biden era polls. So you can see that if the election was held today, this is polling based off of real clear politics and historic trends. If the election was held today, President Trump would still win. But ultimately, it looks like it's coming down to Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia and Arizona. Maybe Nevada, we'll see. But those states in particular are the ones that people are still paying attention to, and that's partly the reason why President Trump is going to be in Detroit this week talking about national security, and Kamala Harris will be in Georgia and so forth. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. The last thing I'm going to talk about is September. Well, in September, there has been some talk about some political issues surrounding a government shutdown. It's our stance that there's not going to be a government shutdown. Putting a government shutdown right before the elections is not good. Neither party wants to do that. But don't be surprised if we do see some members of both parties trying to attach things, because it is getting a little interesting in terms of chatter that we're hearing that there may be some political games being played with certain types of bills. So I just want to leave with you that if you see any headlines coming out over the next week about a shutdown, our view is that there's only a 20% chance of a shutdown. So the last thing I'll leave you with is the September 10th debate is still on, but Bloomberg News was reporting over the weekend that there is a fight about the microphones. If you recall in the debate between President Trump and President Biden, President Trump wanted the microphones on, they were off. President Biden wanted them off, they were off. It's actually the reverse right now. Kamala Harris wants the microphones on, President Trump wants the microphones off. Look, they're going to get it done. They're going to figure out a way. The September 10th debate's most likely going to happen, but just want to highlight because it was a fun story that we're reading from Bloomberg News over the weekend. So I do see there's one question in the chat. What is the Bloomberg terminal link for the election stuff? It is WSL Election Go. So if you just go to WSL Election Go, WSL stands for worksheets. There's actually another one that's kind of cool. I'll just show you real quick. It's called WSL Stock States. And it actually just brings up, state stocks. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick on that one. That actually brings up all the equities that are in swing states right now, at least the key equities that we cover that are in swing states. So you can see here in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, and so forth. And the other thing I would just state is if you go back to this WSL election, one of the new functionalities that came out over the last week was they've put in political donation data. So you can see here, ActBlue donation data, Bloomberg Second Measure, which is a group that Bloomberg acquired. They have observed U.S. political donations. You can see $503 million for Democratic groups, 160 million for Republican groups. Obviously, this is not everything, so that's not a like for like, and so forth. But there's additional information and so forth you can play with right around there. So, and yeah, the question is, are we skipping it next week because of Labor Day? Yes. If you do have any questions, and look, if anything groundbreaking happens over the weekend, I will then send out an email and we'll have this on Tuesday, but I don't think it will. I think it's going to be fairly quiet. But again, if you have any questions in the interim, if you're always feel free to reach out to me or one of my colleagues. My email is ndean10@bloomberg.net. But again, thank you very much for attending. If you do have any questions, feel free to send them over, and I wish you a great week. Thanks.